Well, hello, everyone. Thank you again for joining us on our midweek study as we go through the book of Daniel. We're continuing in chapter 3 and picking up on verse 22. Again, a very exciting situation here. Just to look as we know this is a miracle. We know God is orchestrating this, but just to look at some of the things that we can glean from the history and from the Hebrew slash Aramaic here is just pretty cool. So what you're seeing on your screen right now is the uh, Daniel from the sages or from the Jewish Bible. And so we see that they're talking about the king. Of course, he's been spurned, by the Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego because they didn't want to bow down and worship his golden image. And we looked at what kind of personality he was, and very much a hothead, flies off the handle, and we've seen that before, and now we continue with that. And the English translation here from the Hebrew Bible is very interesting. It says, therefore, the king's commandment, was peremptory. And so, what does this mean? What does peremptory mean? And so we want to take a look at this and look at the Hebrew and just from Bible Hub and see what it shares with us here. And so going to Bible Hub, it says the king's command was urgent. Uh, Again, the English translation is up to the translators, and you're going to see how challenging it is. And hopefully, this will help us to have a better understanding, just to give these translators credit because of what they have to go through. So, this word of what the king, uh, his command, and what he did here was, of course, the King James translates it as urgent or hasty, but yet it comes from something to be a little bit deeper. And what the writers are saying is that this king was insolent. He was acting arrogantly, and basically saying this guy is just out of his mind. That he speaks before he thinks. He only thinks about himself. He doesn't care about anything else, and he's acting very arrogantly. Um, they give us a guide here on the usage compared to what it is in Hebrew, because it's a very close relationship, and it gives us a little bit sense, again, taking us from our 21st century mindset today and just trying to go back as far as possible and think, what were they thinking when they saw this back at the time of the disciples, or even earlier at the time when Daniel was going through this. And it sends boldness with a negative context. Guy has no respect, no reverence towards people, and especially towards God and his commandments. So now you get the understanding of what this king was like. Exceedingly insolent, exceedingly self-centered, and so gave this command to throw them into the furnace. And so these three men, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, fell down bound into the midst of the fiery furnace. What's interesting as we jump here to the commentator um, talking about the word being bound here, um, they were saying, okay, this was a miracle since the bonds should have been burned by intense heat. I love how the Jewish sages are looking for every way possible to attribute a miracle to God and to give him glory for this. So you'll see that here in verse 23, and they fell in this furnace. Um, Last week we talked a little bit about the burning fiery furnace. You'll see the adjectives heaped on here, burning fiery furnace, all compounding the idea of what was going on here. And I did a little bit of research into different furnaces. And so I found that there is a whole book written about pottery kilns, or the uh, lime kilns in particular. There are two different types. This one is about pottery. And so there's a whole different one a book written here on the research and the history of this. And something I had kind of forgotten to think about is in a kiln, whether it be here for firing pottery or making lime, there is an area where they would have bellows and they would blow air into the kiln. And this just changed the understanding of what this furnace was for me when I realized that, okay, with the bellows, you're able to control the temperature. They knew what temperature was required for the firing of pottery. Here they said that between 500 degrees Celsius and 700 degrees Celsius um, is what is needed uh, to harden the clay and create that firing of the clay. Of course, you can get it up to 1,000 degrees or 1,300 degrees. And then there's also the temperature that's used for melting metal. And so, again, new information for me, but knowing that they knew what temperature. So if you were to take just 500 degrees C and make it 7 times hotter, you're dealing with 3,500 degrees of temperature Celsius, which is an incredibly high temperature if they really did it 7 times hotter. I can picture these guys on the bellows just going full out to try to make this as hot as possible because of the king's insistence and his mood in this type of arrangement. So now we got an understanding, or I do, of that they had ability to heat this up by the bellows, by the blowing of the air. And but also in this paper is kind of interesting. It showed the research that they did throughout the area of the Middle East, Mesopotamia, of the different kilns that they were able to find. Incredible documentation. They found that there are different types of kilns. These are kind of rough sketches, but many times they were buried half in the ground and half above the ground. It's what you see here. Here's another one where you had the bricks on the side and you had a grate up on top, and they would blow the air and have the fuel for the fire down below, and there would be an opening here on the top where they could place their pottery. Hence, they could have dropped Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego through the top of this, and you would be able to see them. The whole point of this is how did the king see them as we continue with our story? Here's another shape of a kiln, air blowing in, smaller hole in the top. Probably not the one that we reference in our story. Here's another type of kiln that had more of an enclosed top, half buried in the ground. Here's one that kind of looks like an igloo, even for firing the pottery. Here's one that's completely open on the top. So again, various different types of kilns that they were able to find in their research. Another one that came to light here is from Israel Missions around the world, published this where they excavated a pottery kiln that's 1,600 years old, buried into the ground. You see the guy standing in the middle. You see the hole underneath his arm where the air would be blown through. Again, this is a type that you could see people inside of it. So again, wanted to bring that out just to show that part of it. Um, Very, very interesting to me. So as we continue reading the story, uh, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego fell down amidst the fiery furnace. And then we get to verse 24. And Nebuchadnezzar, the king, was alarmed and rose up in haste and spoke to the ministers, "Did we not cast 3 men into the fire?" And they said, "Yeah, king, this is true." And then he answered and said, "Lo, I see 4 men loose, walking in the midst of the fire, and they have no hurt." The sages are quick to pick up here that because of the wording of this, that the king said, "I see 4 men loose." No one else saw 4 men. This is a miracle, something only the king was able to see. And he saw that the bonds that previously were just there were now broke loose. They were not there. And he saw them walking into the fire. So as we continue this fantastic story, we see two things that are brought out. First of all, of course, as they were dropped in, their bonds were there. Now the bonds have been burned. Their clothes have not been burned, and also they have not been harmed from falling. That's another one that is pointed out, that whatever distance they fell, obviously the heat killed the men who threw them in there. I'm sure they were not gentle with just lightly dropping them down. This was a toss. This was, their lives were lost because of it. So I'm sure there was no gentleness at all, because in their mind they were going to die. So, but from the fall, they suffered no broken bones, didn't get a piece of wood in the eye, nothing harmed them. And of course, the king is looking and he says, the appearance of this fourth is like the son of the gods. You'll find different words being used in the different translations. And here's where we just have to look at this. And this is incredible to see how the sages talk about this person that the king saw. He knew there was something different about this person, and that in the midst of this raging fire, the smoke that was there, whatever was going on, the king saw something that made this um, image of this fourth man stand out from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So here's where we go. The Talmud is a series of writings that the Jewish sages wrote to explain these sort of things. And so we're going to take a look at what the Talmud has to say, and it's listed here in, you can go to sefaria.org and look under the Talmud, and there is Pesachim 118, A, and we get down to verse 19 here, and here is the story and what the sages had been teaching about this episode. And I find it really fascinating. And they talk about the word praise having been originated from this episode of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. Here they have their Hebrew names of Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And so they attribute this miracle to the praise that was given by these three men as they're falling into the fire. Anybody ever think of that before? I didn't, but I would think if I was the one being tossed into the midst of the fiery furnace, my hands would be up. I would be praising God. I would be calling upon the name of the Lord for protection, for guidance. And so here's what they say, that as they were being thrown into the fire, they were shouting hallelujah and saying, the Lord is great, his mercy endures forever. And even what they said here, Hananiah said, praise you all the nations. Mishael recited, laud him all you people. Azariah recited, for great is mercy towards us. So here they recited, and the truth of the Lord endures forever. So here's where it gets really fun, that some of the sages would say that it was the angel Gabriel who was with him in the fire. They relate a story that is in another one of the Jewish history books called the Gemara, which claims that Nimrod had thrown Abraham, our father Abraham, they said, into the fiery furnace, and that Gabriel had gone and saved Abraham. Now, this is only in the Jewish tradition, Jewish folklore, but these are things that the Jews had been taught. If you were a young Jewish boy, you would have been taught this from the time you started your Hebrew school. You would know these stories. And Jesus knew these stories. The disciples knew these stories because they were taught. So there is value in knowing what they were taught, whether you can, we can say that there's scriptural evidence for any of this. We're not here to debate that. We're here to enhance our understanding that the Jewish people knew these stories, and they believed that Abraham was thrown into a furnace by Nimrod. Gabriel intervened, and he descended and cooled the furnace, saving Abraham. And so likewise, here was Gabriel going down to the fiery furnace of Nebuchadnezzar and cooling it down so that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah, their Hebrew names, would not be harmed in this. And so this was Gabriel they felt they had um, seen inside this furnace. And so this was just really cool stuff and really interesting. Hebrew Jewish traditions that we're looking at here. And so I thought you'd enjoy that. The other thing that we have to be aware is that this angel who is there, some Christians would say this is a theophany. It was a presence of God. You'll find some um, Christians would say this is Jesus in pre-incarnate form. We don't have any of that to back that up. All we have here is just our supposition of who was with um, them in the fiery furnace, and the Jewish sages say it was Gabriel, one of the angels. It obviously was a divine being. And so this divine being had to look different, had to be a different appearance. And I'm struggling for words because all I could do is say it had to be shining brighter than the fire that was there. That was 3,500 degrees, white hot coal flames that this um, angelic being, theophany, if you will, had to be glowing in a brighter way. I don't know, just incredible mystery, but yet he was noticeable. He was noticeable from Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who obviously were not glowing, but were in their clothes, walking around in the midst of this fire, unharmed. And so, just fantastic. Um, Unpacking a fantastic idea of what was going on here, and enhances our understanding of this great miracle that God did in the face of Nebuchadnezzar. So we're going to stop there at the end of verse 25. I want to remind everyone that next week is the Thanksgiving holiday, and so we will not be having class next week. But pray that God's blessing will be upon you. You take care, enjoy the holiday with your family. Remember the meaning for the season. Be thankful for all that God has given us, both in our material possessions and in our spiritual walk, and the ability to study and have these languages available, and the ability to have these tools so easily at our disposal that we can study God's Word and increase our understanding. So God bless you all. Take care, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.